Dr. Antonova, it's a pleasure talking to you in this Meet the Speaker interview for Science and Wisdom Live. And thanks for making the time from your very busy schedule. I know how intense it is being an academic right at the beginning of the year. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this interview. And please call me Elena.
Sure, Elena. Sure, Elena. So this interview is very personal. It's actually more about you than all the ideas we're going to be talking about in a few weeks, so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better. And we wanted to start by asking a question about your childhood. If there was some significant event in your childhood that helped you to become who you are today.
Yes, it was a difficult one actually to think about. With this sort of idea of a future self and what determines it, and pinpointing a single event. But eventually, after sort of a few candidate events, I settled on two things. And one was a sort of physical event of visiting a museum of natural history, the sort of equivalent of science museum, with my mother. I was about 6 or 7. And we were walking through different rooms. There were stuffed animals and other exhibits of similar sort. And then at some point we walk into a room which wasn't annotated in any way. So neither of us were expecting what we're going to see there. And it was semi-dark, and it was full of shelves with the brains in the jars in formalin. And I remember very distinctly my mom went, "Yuck," and I went, "Wow." And I remember that sort of childlike sense of absolute fascination, seeing these brains. And I remember sort of my mind rushing through this kind of thoughts of, you know, what an amazing thing, and what does that all mean, and how it relates to who I am. So that was a very memorable moment. And then I would say other events were actually my dreams, childhood dreams, and they were so out of this world. And I was so dissatisfied when I tried to understand them, you know, with a kind of modern psychological accounts of them that I read as a teenager, that they are regurgitations of the day past and kind of processing of the memories from the day past. I just felt this just does not touch my dreams, because they they were very vivid, very colorful, full of what I now would say symbols, kind of archetypal symbols. So that got me to read Carl Gustav Jung. So that took me on a whole journey inside of myself. That had a huge impact on how I then developed and the kind of things I became interested from that point onwards. And that led me to Tibetan Buddhism, and that led me to Dzogchen, and that led me to this conversation with you.
Amazing. Well, it's wonderful, these two things you combine, because one is so concrete, seeing real brains and being fascinated about see those outside of the body and what that means. And then also this deep inner experience that you had. It seems both those two things seem so directly to what your life has become. So thanks for sharing those stories. So now we'll talk a little bit about today. So in your everyday life today, what gives you the most satisfaction in your work, and particularly in regard to benefiting others? You know, I think that's a value a lot of us share in who are interested in contemplation and humanity. So can you talk a little bit about that? What gives you daily satisfaction?
Yes, I got to the point in my work life where often there is too much of a good thing. So in many ways, I am doing a lot of things that I really would like to do, but sometimes the sheer amount of them can make me feel dissatisfied. So I would, when I was thinking about this question, you know, what brings me satisfaction is when I'm able to do them in the time that allows me to do them properly, to do them thoughtfully, mindfully. When I feel like I can give myself to it. So through I don't like kind of rushing through these tasks, but usually in my daily life, working life, it's often the case these days. And then I think the usefulness and the benefit value kind of linked to that, because I think when we do something, with love and awareness and sense of purpose and sense of passion, or inspiration at least, it will be useful to someone, it will be beneficial to someone, it will resonate with someone. And I think probably a lot of people, and particularly academic, can probably relate to this constant trade-off between too much of a good thing and being able to do these good things that come to our life with that sense of having time to do them.
Yeah, it's very difficult to create that space in your life, isn't it? A lot of people say that. One of my teachers, Venerable Renee, says that if you're going to do a 2-week retreat, you should do a 2-week vacation before, so that you're relaxed and present. What are these things though that you have too much of? Is it that you enjoy? Is it conducting research or teaching? Just to be practical about what you do every day.
It's a combination of those things. Yes, being a lecturer in a research-based institution, those are the kind of two main things I have to balance out with my time. But a lot of teaching, but my teaching tends to be research-led, and so project supervision directly fits into my research. So sometimes it's difficult to draw that boundary. So it's a kind of synergistic. Synergistic activity. But yes, I enjoy doing research, and I am doing quite a few research projects now that I wanted to do for a long time, but it's difficult to give adequate time to each of them because I sort of have to juggle too many balls, spin too many plates at the same time.
Can you talk a little bit how scientific research has informed your understanding of meditation, contemplation?
I wouldn't say it did.
No.
I would say that my scientific mindset definitely has an impact on how I approach practice and how I approach my study of contemplative traditions and my engagement with contemplative traditions. But I wouldn't say that I rely much on my scientific knowledge or scientific research when I approach my first person study of contemplative traditions.
And has the other direction had an impact? Like, has your meditation affected your research? I mean, of course, your research is on mindfulness. Much of your research is on mindfulness and contemplation. So how did your own practice affect your research in those areas?
I would say entirely and absolutely.
Okay, so that's the direction. In
that direction, everything that I do for my research is informed by my mindfulness practice and experience. And I would say that I won't normally research things that I only have conceptual understanding of. I would wait until I have experiential feel for them, at least a glimpse. Because I find that giving it proper justice and understanding it, and particularly when I engage with experienced meditators, it does help to have experiential understanding in addition to conceptual one to do it proper justice.
That's very nice. That's very aligned with the meditative traditions, that you need to, it's like, chocolate or love, you can't just read about them. You need to have the experience, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, it sometimes goes contrary to what others in this field believe. because sometimes the question of objectivity is brought up. You know,
Yes,
to
yeah.
what extent can you be objective if it's sort of too? But I pondered this question, and I don't think in this particular case it applies. It's a little bit like, it's not great to do visual neuroscience research whilst you're blindfolded. You know, it's not going to help your conceptual framework. It's not going to help with you being subtle and nuanced with the type of research questions that you're bringing in. You want to understand what a participant is telling you if you're blindfolded and they are in full vision. So, and you actually can see when you read a scientific paper on meditation, it would be interesting experiment actually to see, but at least it feels to me, I can tell apart when it's written by a scientist who's also a practitioner, and who's someone from a kind of mainstream, you know, very well trained scientist from a cognitive neuroscience framework, but comes with a sort of mainstream framework and vocabulary. And that's then just kind of gets imposed onto the practice.
Yeah.
And it settles, and you can just see the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the words, when the language is just a kind of signposting to a particular experience, versus when the experience, well, there's no flow, you know, it's fixed with the words and there's nothing beyond the words, because the essence of experience is actually not captured by those words. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's also very visible, not just in the contemplative neuroscience field. It's also, to me as a practitioner, it's very visible when I read scholastic academic books on meditation practice. And you can sort of, you have a sense when the author actually a practitioner themselves, and when it's someone who comes from a scholarly perspective entirely without the backup of personal experience.
Yeah. Well, in the Buddhist traditions, there are big warnings that you can study intellectually your entire life, but if you don't actually practice, then that knowledge isn't of much use. So it seems like you're putting that into practice in your own life. I mean, it's interesting though, because what you're studying is a subjective experience, right, as a meditator, but you're trying to find objective, like, correlates and proofs of those experiences, right? Is that a reasonable way to explain, you know, some of the research to show that there's some way to measure some of the effects of those inner experiences that we feel subjectively?
I will bring Francisco Varela.
Okay.
That's what he would say to this,
Yeah.
and I totally with it.
Yeah.
I would first bracket out the word objective and say the third person perspective.
Yeah, better.
And both are lived experience, both are domains of lived experience, both are phenomenal domains. So I'm interested to look at the relationship between these two phenomenal domains. One, first experience of, let's say, meditation practice, and another, a third person experience of the meditation practice. Because, you know, as a neuroscientist looking at the brain in an fMRI scanner, it's another experience I'm having.
That's very wise. I think I think I'll actually carry that idea with me for the rest of my life, because these words subjective and objective are very problematic. If you say first person and third person, it makes a lot more sense, and I think it's a bit more accurate. So thank you. Thanks for the correction. Why do you think this dialogue between science and contemplative traditions is important?
One of the main reasons is this clarification we just did. I think contemplative practice could educate science, bring it out of scientism back to its essence of being a science.
Yeah.
What that means. I think a lot of us scientists would benefit from this training of staying with the question and not jumping for the answer, having more open framework when we're investigating the relationship between, let's say, you know, first and third person observed phenomena. um, that's will be very beneficial for science.
Mm. Could you, I bet some people listening to this aren't familiar with the word scientism. So could you define that?
There are probably a few different facets to this, but I think the most relevant to this conversation and what I mean by it, or what I would like to touch on is this kind of deep-rootedness, particularly for neuroscience, in the framework of materialist reductionism. You know, this sort of ontology of, you know, brain, consciousness, the little nuances of, you know, just it could be an emergent phenomena, or it could be related to brain activity in some way. So there's a little bit of flexibility there with the type of frameworks that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't question this main assumption that brain is in some way a generator of conscious
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this framework can take us, you know, it's been productive in many ways, but it's at the same time doesn't allow us to touch on many experiences
Mm-hmm.
that don't fit into it. And therefore, they either, you know, they acquire all sorts of various different labels
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and being put aside in the best case scenario, completely disregarded or dismissed in the worst case scenario. And I don't think for us with this level of knowledge where we are now, useful to close the paradigm this way. And I don't see any conflict, any problem with using reduction
Mm-hmm.
as an empirical method. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we use reduction as an empirical method in the first person study. You know, when meditating, we regularly zoom in into particular aspects of experience to study it closer, and then we can expand to zoomed out viewpoint and switch between the two multiple times, right? During the same meditation
Mm-hmm.
session or in the course of our meditation practice. So as scientists, we do need to zoom in. And phenomenologists, you know, they use the notion of phenological reduction as a way of, okay, I'm going to circumscribe a particular aspect of experience, to look at it deeper, to understand it in more detail, but then not forgetting that that's what we did.
Yeah.
That we just zoomed in into a particular aspect,
Yeah.
you know, and just keep on staying there, and then deriving a whole lot of assumptions about the world just because we looked at a very zoomed in part. And as scientists, we often forget that we just zoomed in, and we often forget about the fact that it's practical, but it's in no way absolute truth about things.
Yeah. So the idea of scientism is then that everything can be reduced to a material cause. I was introduced to this idea a long time ago by Houston Smith, I think, who wrote about it a lot, you know, almost 20 years ago, that it's a belief that everything could be reduced to a material cause, even though we don't have all that evidence yet, especially in the areas of research in the mind. So I guess what you're saying is to have an open-mindedness to what the mind is, and it could be entirely of a material cause, but who knows what the answer is, right? Being a true scientist is being both critical and open-minded at the same time, right? Which is the trick of finding that balance.
Yeah. But critical for me, I actually prefer the word discerning.
Discerning, yeah.
Yeah. Because you can analyze something critically by bringing doubt into it, but you can analyze something with clarity, yet be discerning. So, yeah, I think it's a skill that comes with practice as well. And definitely something I find very useful and beneficial in the way I now approach things. But other way around, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how science might inform contemplative practice, and my particular interest is actually, I'm quite interested in um, cross-tradition comparison.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes when reading books and, you know, scholarly books on various traditions, that I often get the sense that traditions can get stuck
Yeah.
on a finger, right?
Yeah.
Rather than where it's pointing. And I think science can be helpful there. I
Yeah.
think with the will of the practitioners from different traditions. And
Mm.
actually this interview method that I've just done an online course on with Claire Petit-Mangin called Macrophenomenology Interview,
Mm-hmm.
where you and in fact with experienced meditators, I observed the interviews that were conducted by qualified microphenomenologists,
Mm-hmm.
of the expert practitioners, and I was an observer. There was a study I was running, but I'm not
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't qualified to do it at this point, so I was just observing. And we had practitioners of Dzogchen and Mahamudra and
Mm-hmm.
Zen tradition, and with a skillful interviewer, microphenomenology interviewer, he constantly reminds the practitioners to abstract from the language of tradition,
Mm.
actually articulate a felt sense of what it feels like um,
Mm.
to have a very subtle state of being
Mm.
during meditation practice. The words the practitioners find, the metaphors the practitioners use from different traditions, there's no difference. There's like
Mm.
one-to-one correspondence. You know, I was amazed
Mm.
how many people from different tradition used one particular analogy,
Mm.
which is actually not very common in the traditions. It's something they
Mm.
came up with that they felt described the dynamic of their
Mm.
experience the best. And it was just amazing how many people
Mm.
used the same analogy, and it wasn't your usual, you know,
Mm.
observing yourself like leaves on the water, or on the,
Yeah.
you know, river passing by, or the clouds in the sky. It was very interesting. So I'm very interested
Mm.
in whether science can help um, to sort of identify the active
Mm.
ingredients and practices
Mm.
versus some things that might have become traditional due to some procedural or other secondary
Yeah.
purposes. Mm.
That's incredible, because it points to science not just, you know, validating contemplative experience, but actually adding to the traditions and finding the commonalities of, you know, different experiences in very, very different traditions. So that sounds incredible. I'd like to hear more about that sometime. One last question for you though. A goal of the Science and Wisdom Live is to address urgent problems in the world, or at least talk about how they could be addressed. And the last question is sort of hopeful: is if you could be granted one wish to solve one of the urgent problems of the world through contemplation and science, what would that problem be? You have a lot to choose from right now, so.
True, but I
Yeah.
think in many ways a lot of our problems due to the fact that we have become so rooted with this view that we are our brains collective. Not all of us, but a lot of us, and I see that in the students, you know, in my young students who choose to do psychology and cognitive neuroscience. It became such a societally engraved, accepted belief for many people. Again, I repeat, not everyone, but a lot of people. And, you know, Patricia Chartland, the philosopher of mind, neurophilosopher, she actually formulated the term neuroexistentialism. And where you are your brain, you know, in her book, Touching the Nerve. And I think from where I'm sitting, from where I'm seeing, and being a neuroscientist myself, there's a lot of distortions about how we relate to life, how we understand awareness, our connection to each other, our connection to nature. I think that belief, whether it's implicit or explicit, is in the heart of these distortions. Um, so if I had a sort of a wish and a magic wand, that's one splinter would take out of everyone's mind and just open ourselves up to other way of exploring what awareness is and exploring who we are, you know, rather than us blindly identifying with this mass of gray matter and fatty tissue between our ears, as fascinating as I still find them.
That's a great place to end. And, you know, very achievable too. You know, this is something where it's a problem that can be addressed person by person. So, well, thank you so much. I got a lot out of this conversation. Talking to someone like you, I really feel like, you know, just a few things that you've said, some of them will stick with me through my life. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know how busy you are, and I'm looking forward to our conversation with the other participants in a few weeks. So.